So yeah, what's next for IPMX? Or I named it an open operability ecosystem for AV over IP, and I'll explain why I kind of chose that. But I'm going to start off with just a little bit of history of IPMX, so you can kind of look at the evolution of it. But mostly, I wanted to kind of point out that when we started with IPMX, we didn't call it IPMX. We were working with SMPTE2110 plus NMOS plus a bunch of stuff we know we need. And we really thought of it as like bringing SMPTE2110 to Pro AV. But as we were going along, we created the name, the roadmap. We had the Dirty Hands event, and then the announcements of the TR10 documents. We really felt that we learned a lot along the way. So some of the insights and realizations that we had, first of all, as has been mentioned earlier, quite literally, the Pro AV market is 10x the size of the broadcast market, right? And they have extremely diverse needs. We've talked about that. Accessibility is key, right? One thing I want to mention is that Pro AV does not mean that there's no live production happening, right? Obviously, we know that, but like tremendous amount of live production happening in the Pro AV world. So it's very important to them. And it just has to work, right? We say it just has to work, plug and play. Software people call that accessibility. It's a key part of it, right? So we have a 10 times the size of the market. We've got accessibility as a key driver here. So how do we do that? How do we build on what we have? We've had the JTNM process. I think that maybe some would disagree with me, but I think that the level of interoperability we've achieved with SMPTE2110 and NMOS is adequate and impressive, but it's not what the Pro AV world will be able to handle. And so what we kind of are thinking is that this really goes beyond just standards, and we need to have that layer above it, a program that's enforceable, testing requirements, the whole kind of interoperability ecosystem. And we're looking at kind of Wi-Fi and USB as good examples of what I'm talking about. So you can make an 802.11 device that supports all the things that a Wi-Fi device supports. But in order for you to put that Wi-Fi sticker on or Wi-Fi logo on that box or talk about Wi-Fi in your product, you have to talk to the Wi-Fi Association. And they have a fee involved, and there's testing involved, and all that kind of stuff, right? And the same is true for USB. We think that IPMX, what started as just a name for SMPTE2110 plus NMOS plus everything else, we think IPMX needs to take a similar path. So standards, compliance, performance testing, all of that together to make IPMX. So from the manufacturer's perspective, they come to IPMX, and we hear this all the time. Where do I download the standards? How do I know what to do, right? What they're also kind of asking is, how do I put the logo on my product, or how do I make a compliant product? And that's the work of TR10 documents, of course, and everything else, but we really do need that contract. We need that central document, that requirements and specifications document that spells out what the requirements are to use the IPMX logo and what their device has to do. So this is very similar to the TR, well, it's related to the TR 1001 document, 1001-1 document, but there's more to it, right? So we have a backlog of things that need to go into this document. It includes, everything from, the control plane architecture, everything that's in there. But I wanted to go through kind of 3 hot topics that are kind of on deck that we're discussing within AIMS, where we're drafting this document, right? So there's codecs and profiles, SMPTE2110 and AES67 interoperability and testing and certification. I'll go through each one. I had a 4th here, which is control planes. Not only do we have to be able to connect devices, but we also need to be able to set the parameters of those devices once you do connect. Otherwise, you're just back to square one. And there's some options out there for that, but I'll leave that for another time. So codecs and profiles, we talked about this earlier. We had a very lively and awesome discussion. Actually, I really thoroughly enjoyed it. So. But I'll just kind of highlight some of the questions that we're tackling, right? So when we're talking about the profile, what is part of the profile? So what's the goal of the profile, right? So a profile is simply saying, if your box says IPMX, what you know is that you'll be able to discover it and see it on the network thanks to everything having to support NMOS. But in terms of knowing whether or not device A and B will actually send audio and video together, that's the job of the profile. So the profile defines a minimal interoperability point so that the product works like you said. And from there, we can choose to define it even further, right? We could, for example, decide to say, you have to support 1080p, or you have to support, you know, such and so audio or whatever. And we do actually do that in the TR10-9 documents a little bit, but where the profile is really about within this one section, how is interoperability achieved? And beyond the codec, you know, there might be very little else, you know, so the profiles really might just be a name that we put in front of whatever the defined profile is. Now I'll mention again, and we said this earlier, IPMX does not stop you from adding proprietary codecs, you know, whether they be VBR or CBR to, you know, your product. It's just, we have these profiles defined so that those that want to use IPMX as an interoperable ecosystem have something to anchor their product to. Because you can't, if we were dealing with software, we wouldn't have to make those decisions because just make sure you have FFmpeg installed and whatever that supports, you use that codec. But since we have to support hardware and potentially ASICs one day, we have to make those decisions. So what to name the profiles and of course how to label, you know, that's part of it as well. So this is an interesting one that we're having right now. So you have, of course, a lot of devices out there that support AES-67 and SMPTE-2110. You also have devices that will be IPMX devices that maybe can also be SMPTE-2110 senders, right? So maybe I have an IPMX, maybe I have a gateway device, I plug it into my laptop, and most of the time it's sending asynchronous video because that would be the lowest latency, you know, video that it could do, right? But then I want to be able to switch it into SMPTE-2110 mode, and I want to be able to, you know, so that I can participate in a SMPTE-2110 network. How do you know that your product can do that? How do we do that in the control plane? How do you advertise that? How do you label the product, right? But a bigger topic, or one of much more, you know, discussion has been how do you, if I have an AES-67 audio device, or I've got a production mixer, right? I am not going to go in and support TR10-1, you know, for asynchronous audio. But I can put NMOS in there. I can do every other thing in my product except for support your asynchronous audio and video. Is there a way we can label that product, like a works with, or something like that, that says like, hey, this is not IPMX, this is not going to support asynchronous video and audio, but can we signal that this device works very easily with IPMX, right? So those are, you know, the opportunities and, you know, questions that we're kind of going on right now. And I tell you, that one is almost as hot as the codec discussion. And then testing and certification. So thankfully, and this is just a huge asset for us, we have the history of the JT&M process and doing these testing events, which has been just invaluable in developing IPMX. But unfortunately, you know, that process doesn't scale to the size that we need, right? So, you know, we're asking questions, you know, how do we support the early stages? Right now it's that JT&M process, you know, but eventually as we move on and start and launch IPMX, how can we transition from that into one where we're managing third-party testing and certification facilities, right? How do we develop the test plan that they need? Where are the gaps, that kind of thing. So, and I'll talk a little bit about our timeline going forward, but those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. You know, also, you know, it's an open standard, and so we think it's free, but in fact, you know, managing, maintaining this, keeping up with changes in the industry, new use cases, new profiles that are going to be needed, new technologies, we're going to have to support the effort. And not only that, if we have third-party testing, they're going to need money to do their part of it too. That's not free. So we need to, there is a fee, you know, to use the logo, there will be a fee. Our goal is to make free option, of course, especially for open source projects, but we need to have language in there to say, okay, this is self-tested, this is certified, this is somewhere in between certified and self-tested, or however that works. But these are the things that we need to do, and remember that experience that the user has. IPMX either is great or it sucks, depending on how well we get this right. If we can get the testing right and people have good experience with interoperability, then things are great. So there's other questions on there that we're asking here, but those are the main ones. So earlier I showed a little bit of the history here, and this is kind of what the roadmap looks for the next year or so here. So in Q2, we intend to have our draft complete, hopefully maybe even the document complete for that IPMX requirements and specifications document. So, not only testing, but also, labeling, performance requirements, how it behaves when PTP is misconfigured. There might be all kinds of things that we have in there for what a device needs to do to conform to IPMX. So that's that document, Q2. And then, as Jack mentioned, we'll have an implementation testing event scheduled for sometime in August. Then we'll announce those test results at IBC. And then in Q4, more or less, that's when we're going to use to really focus on creating that test plan in anticipation for both internal use and then eventually also kind of looking for that third-party external testing and certification. And then we'll have an event to validate that work. And at that event, I think, none of this is set in stone, but our intention right now is that really the implementations that have been through this process, at that event, that will be like a clean hands event where we'll be testing those implementations to make sure that they're of high quality and working as expected, the standards are good. And then if all goes well, our intent is to launch IPMX at ISC 2025. And the work will continue on from there, and that's at that point, after that, that's where we'll I think the next major step forward will be really looking at, how to evolve the testing and certification infrastructure. So that's kind of a whirlwind look at, I didn't say who I was in my thank you. So I'm Andy Starks, I give my email address, but that's my presentation, so.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, absolutely.